The morning sun streamed through the airport terminal windows as a well-dressed woman in her mid-30s rolled her carry-on suitcase toward gate B-17. She'd spent the last 5 years building her reputation at one of Chicago's top law firms, and today's merger negotiation could be her biggest career milestone yet. Checking her watch, a gift from her grandmother when she passed the bar exam, she smiled, knowing she'd arrived with plenty of time to spare. The terminal buzzed with the usual morning rush. Business people clutching coffee cups, families corralling excited children, and flight crews striding purposefully toward their gates. Her phone buzzed with another message from her team back at the office. "Got those last-minute contract revisions ready for you to review on the flight," the text read. Perfect timing, she thought, especially since she'd managed to snag a first-class upgrade with her accumulated miles. After years of cramped economy seats and middle-row compromises, she'd finally earned enough frequent flyer miles for the upgrade. A quiet, comfortable space would be ideal for reviewing those documents. As she approached the counter to check in, she straightened her charcoal gray blazer, the lucky one she wore for all her big presentations. The gate agent greeted her with a warm smile, scanned her boarding pass, and congratulated her on the upgrade. "Looks like all those business trips finally paid off," the agent said with a friendly wink. Walking down the jet bridge, she mentally rehearsed key points for the upcoming negotiation. Her law firm had entrusted her with leading this $50 million merger deal, and she wasn't about to let them down. The weight of her leather laptop bag, packed with carefully prepared documents, reminded her of all the late nights and early mornings that had led to this moment. Stepping onto the plane, she caught the familiar scent of coffee brewing in the galley. The first-class cabin welcomed her with its spacious leather seats and peaceful atmosphere. As she stored her carry-on in the overhead compartment, she noticed other passengers settling in, a mix of seasoned business travelers and a few lucky upgraders like herself. Finding her seat, 2D, she arranged her workspace efficiently. Laptop positioned on the wide tray table, important documents within easy reach, and her phone set to airplane mode. A flight attendant passed by, offering pre-flight beverages to other passengers, while she pulled up the merger documents on her tablet. The cabin gradually filled with the subtle murmur of conversations and the rustle of magazines. She took a moment to text her mother. "About to take off. First class. Can you believe it?" Her mom's reply came quickly. "So proud of you, honey. You've earned every bit of this." Little did she know that this routine business flight was about to become anything but ordinary. As she sat there, reviewing her notes and sipping water from a crystal glass, she had no idea that the next few hours would test her character in ways she never expected, and ultimately lead to changes that would ripple through the entire airline industry. The other first-class passengers continued boarding, nodding polite greetings as they passed. She felt completely at ease, belonging in this space she'd worked so hard to reach. The morning sunlight still streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the cabin. Everything seemed perfect, the calm before an unexpected storm that would soon test her resilience and change her life forever. The first hint of trouble came just as the plane finished boarding. A flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp uniform stopped at row 2, doing a double take at her seat. "May I see your boarding pass?" she asked, her tone carrying an edge that hadn't been present when she greeted other passengers. "Of course," the lawyer replied politely, pulling up the digital pass on her phone. She held it out, showing the clear 2D seat assignment and first-class designation. The flight attendant studied it for an unusually long time, her lips pressed into a thin line. "There must be some mistake," the attendant said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure you're not meant to be in economy?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. A few other passengers looked up from their magazines and phones, watching the scene unfold. Our lawyer took a deep breath, maintaining her professional composure. "No mistake," she said firmly but politely. "I use my miles for an upgrade. The gate agent confirmed it. She'd been in enough courtrooms to recognize when someone was trying to throw her off balance, and she wasn't about to let that happen. But the flight attendant wasn't finished. She returned 5 minutes later, this time with a different request. "We need to see your physical boarding pass," she insisted, despite having already verified the digital one. The other first-class passengers weren't being asked for additional verification of their tickets. A businessman across the aisle looked uncomfortable, glancing between his own untouched digital boarding pass and the scene playing out beside him. An elderly woman 2 rows ahead turned around, her eyes filled with concern and recognition of what was really happening. "I keep all my travel documents organized," the lawyer explained calmly, reaching into her bag to pull out the printed pass. Years of presenting evidence in court had taught her the importance of documentation. She handed it over, noting how her hand remained steady despite her rising frustration. The flight attendant examined the paper boarding pass with the same suspicious scrutiny. "This seems irregular," she declared, though it was identical to every other first-class boarding pass issued that day. "Let me check with my supervisor." While the attendant was gone, a young flight attendant in training passed by and quietly whispered, "I'm so sorry about this." The small gesture of acknowledgement meant everything in that moment. When the first attendant returned, her face wore an expression of manufactured concern. "For security reasons," she announced loudly, "we'll need you to move to economy class while we sort this out." She gestured toward the back of the plane, clearly expecting immediate compliance. Several phones came out, their cameras capturing what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. The lawyer looked around the cabin, noting the faces of potential witnesses. Her legal training kicked in. She knew the importance of staying calm and collecting evidence. "I'd like to speak with the captain," she stated firmly, her voice clear and controlled. "And I'd like you to explain, specifically, what security concerns you have." She pulled out her own phone, opened her notes app, and began documenting the time and details of each interaction. The flight attendant's face flushed red. She hadn't expected such a composed and professional response. More passengers were watching now, and the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had grown tense. Some looked away uncomfortably, but others were clearly supportive, nodding in approval at the lawyer's reasonable requests. The situation had reached a tipping point. What started as a routine flight was transforming into a moment that would soon capture national attention and spark important conversations about prejudice in the airline industry. But for now, in that pressurized cabin at Gate B-17, a lone professional woman sat calmly in seat 2D, her hands folded in her lap, waiting to see what would happen next. Things escalated quickly after the lawyer's request to speak with the captain. 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the first-class cabin, their presence drawing concerned murmurs from nearby passengers. The flight attendant had apparently called them, while claiming there was a situation that needed handling. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the taller officer said, his tone professional but firm. The lawyer felt her heart racing, though her exterior remained calm. She'd spent countless hours in courtrooms defending others' rights. Now she was living through exactly the kind of incident she'd fought against. "I'd like to understand the specific reason I'm being asked to leave my assigned seat," she responded, her voice steady despite the humiliation of having every eye in the cabin on her. "I have a valid first-class ticket, which has been verified multiple times." An older gentleman in a business suit stood up from his seat. "I've been watching this whole thing," he said to the security officers. "This lady has done absolutely nothing wrong." He pulled out a business card from his wallet. "I'm a retired federal judge, and what I'm seeing here is textbook discrimination." The flight attendant jumped in quickly. "She's being disruptive," she claimed, though everyone in the cabin had witnessed the lawyer's perfectly composed behavior. Several passengers shook their heads in disagreement. A young woman with a large social media following was already live-streaming the incident from her phone. "Everyone watching needs to see this," she narrated quietly. "This is what we deal with every day, even in 2024. The lawyer gathered her belongings with deliberate movements, her hands slightly trembling as she packed her laptop. She prepared for tomorrow's merger meeting for weeks, and now this humiliating scene threatened to derail everything. But years of facing challenges had taught her to turn setbacks into opportunities for change. "I'll move to economy," she said, standing tall. "But I want everyone to know I'm doing so under protest, and I'll be filing a formal complaint about this discriminatory treatment." Her voice carried just enough for the whole cabin to hear, but without a hint of anger. As she moved toward the economy section, support came from unexpected places. A flight attendant from economy whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'll be writing a statement about what I witnessed." Another passenger offered to email her the video they'd recorded. The economy cabin was packed, with no empty seats together. The flight attendant who'd started all this seemed pleased as she pointed to a middle seat in the very last row, right by the bathrooms. "This is your new seat," she said, barely hiding her satisfaction. But karma has a way of working things out. A kind-faced grandmother in an aisle seat spoke up. "Honey, why don't you take my seat? I saw what happened up there, and I'd be happy to trade." Several other passengers nodded in support, some offering their own seats. The lawyer politely declined the offers, taking the assigned middle seat with dignity. She pulled out her phone one last time before takeoff, making detailed notes about everything that had happened. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. It was about making sure no one else would have to go through the same experience. The plane finally took off, nearly 30 minutes behind schedule. As they climbed into the clouds, the lawyer pulled out a small notebook and began writing. The merger documents lay forgotten in her bag. Instead, she was outlining a different kind of proposal, one that would eventually reshape airline industry training policies and corporate culture. Little did that flight attendant know, but her discriminatory actions were about to lead to one of the biggest changes in airline customer service history. Sometimes, the most powerful movements for change start in the most unexpected places, like a middle seat in the last row of an ordinary flight to Chicago. About 30 minutes into the flight, the retired judge made his way back to economy class, carefully balancing himself against the seats as the plane encountered mild turbulence. He stopped at the lawyer's row, speaking quietly but with clear purpose. "I've been a judge for over 30 years, he said, handing her another business card. "What happened up there? I've seen it too many times in my courtroom. This needs to be addressed properly." His eyes reflected decades of experience with similar cases. The lawyer tucked the card carefully into her wallet. "Thank you, Your Honor," she whispered, mindful of nearby passengers. "I'm actually a corporate attorney myself." They shared a knowing look, both understanding the power of proper documentation and procedure. Meanwhile, the social media influencer who had recorded everything was busy editing her footage a few rows ahead. She turned around, her face bright with purpose. "My followers are already sharing this like crazy," she said. "I've got over 50,000 views in just the last 20 minutes. People need to see this." But what happened next was even more interesting. A flight attendant from economy class, not the one who would cause all the trouble, stopped by with a complimentary snack and water. "I've worked here for 15 years, she confided quietly, looking around to make sure no one was listening. That flight attendant up front, she's done this before. Many of us have complained about her behavior." The lawyer pulled out her notebook again, jotting down this new information. "Would you be willing to make a formal statement?" she asked. The flight attendant nodded without hesitation, writing down her employee ID number on a napkin. More passengers kept finding excuses to walk past her row on their way to the bathroom. Each one had something to add. A business executive mentioned he'd seen similar incidents on other flights. A teacher shared how this reminded her of what some of her students faced. A nurse told her about witnessing discrimination in healthcare. "You're handling this with such grace," said the grandmother who had offered her seat earlier. "But don't let them mistake your dignity for weakness. She reached over and patted the lawyer's hand. My generation fought these battles too. Now it's your turn to make things better for the next one. The lawyer found herself becoming the center of an impromptu support network at 35,000 feet. People weren't just offering sympathy. They were offering evidence, testimonials, and contact information. Each person who stopped by added another piece to what was becoming a powerful case for change. Even the pilot got involved, though indirectly. He sent a message through one of the sympathetic flight attendants. I'll be filing my own report about this incident. This isn't what our airline stands for. As the flight progressed, the lawyer's notebook filled with names, numbers, and detailed accounts. But more importantly, she was building something powerful. A coalition of witnesses from all walks of life who were tired of seeing such behavior go unchallenged. The retired judge came back one more time before returning to his seat. You know, he said thoughtfully, sometimes the most effective changes don't come from courtroom battles. They come from someone smart enough to turn a moment of injustice into an opportunity for systemic change. Looking around at all the people who had stepped forward to support her, the lawyer began to see beyond her initial humiliation. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about using her legal skills, professional experience, and this unexpected network of allies to create real, lasting change in how airlines treat all their passengers. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, she had already outlined a plan that would transform this troubling incident into something much bigger than herself. Sometimes, she realized, leadership means taking the very thing meant to diminish you and using it to lift everyone up instead. As the plane made its final approach into Chicago, the lawyer took advantage of these last few moments to organize everything she'd gathered during the flight. Her phone was filled with contact information from supportive passengers, and her notebook had become a detailed record of events that would prove invaluable. A young flight attendant, different from the one who'd caused the trouble, slipped her a stack of papers. Here's the official incident report, she whispered. I made sure to write down exactly what happened, including times and witness statements from the crew. Some of us have been wanting to speak up about this for a long time. The lawyer carefully tucked the papers into her briefcase. Years of handling corporate cases had taught her the value of detailed documentation. She noticed something interesting in the report. Apparently, this wasn't the first time similar incidents had occurred on this flight attendant's shifts. The social media influencer, still sitting a few rows ahead, turned around again. The video's gone viral, she said quietly. Over 500,000 views now. Corporate headquarters has already started responding to comments. They're in damage control mode. But the lawyer wasn't interested in viral fame or quick apologies. She was thinking bigger. During the flight, she'd outlined a comprehensive plan on her laptop, not just for addressing this incident, but for creating lasting change in airline policies and training procedures. The retired judge stopped by one final time before landing. You've got yourself quite a case here, he said, looking at her organized stack of evidence. But I have a feeling you're planning something more constructive than a lawsuit. She nodded, sharing her vision for systemic change rather than just personal compensation. Other passengers had been quietly documenting things too. A business consultant showed her screenshots of similar incidents reported on social media. A flight attendant from another airline shared internal policy documents about handling customer complaints. Each piece added to the bigger picture she was building. The grandmother who'd been so supportive earlier passed her a handwritten letter. My statement about what I witnessed, she explained. I may be old, but my eyes and memory work just fine. And honey, what I saw today wasn't right. As the plane touched down, the lawyer noticed something remarkable. The incident that started as an attempt to humiliate her had instead created a powerful network of allies. Every person who'd stepped forward had added another piece to the puzzle, helping build a case that would be impossible to ignore. The lead flight attendant, who had stayed neutral during the flight, approached her as passengers began gathering their belongings. I need to apologize, she said quietly. I should have stepped in sooner. But I want you to know that I've documented everything in the official flight log. You'll have access to that record if you need it." While other passengers rushed to make their connections, the lawyer took her time, making sure every document was properly organized and every contact number correctly saved. She'd learned long ago that the key to creating real change wasn't just about having evidence. It was about presenting it in a way that demanded attention and action. The social media storm was still growing. Messages of support were pouring in from around the world. But unlike many viral moments that flare up and fade away, this one would be different. Because this time, someone with the right skills, experience, and determination was ready to transform a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for lasting change. As she finally stepped off the plane, the lawyer smiled slightly. She still had her big merger meeting to handle, but now she had an even more important project to work on. Sometimes, the most powerful changes come not from fighting against something wrong, but from building something better to replace it. 3 days after the flight incident, the lawyer sat in her Chicago office, surrounded by stacks of carefully organized documents. She'd just finished her successful merger negotiation, and now it was time to address the airline situation. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages of support since the video went viral. "Your complaint has been received. Read the airline's first automated email response. We're offering you 50,000 bonus miles and our sincere apologies." She couldn't help but smile at their standard customer service approach. They clearly didn't realize who they were dealing with. Instead of accepting their quick fix, she spent hours preparing a detailed presentation. Her office walls were covered with sticky notes mapping out a comprehensive training program. This wasn't about getting free miles or a simple apology. It was about changing how airlines handle diversity and customer service. The retired judge had connected her with several civil rights attorneys, but she had a different plan in mind. "We're not going to sue them," she explained during a conference call. "We're going to show them how to fix their entire system." Her colleagues were skeptical at first, but her passion was convincing. She compiled everything into a professional proposal: the viral video footage, witness statements, flight attendant testimonials, and most importantly, a detailed plan for corporate change. The document included statistics, training modules, and clear steps for implementation. When her phone rang with the Chicago area code, she was ready. "This is the airline's corporate office," the voice said. "We'd like to discuss your situation." The hesitation in the spokesperson's voice told her they'd finally realized this wasn't going to be resolved with bonus miles. "I'd be happy to meet," she replied calmly. "I've prepared a comprehensive presentation about improving your company's training procedures. When would your board be available?" The silence on the other end was telling. They'd expected complaints, maybe threats of a lawsuit, not a professional development proposal. The social media storm had grown beyond just one incident. People were sharing similar stories from other airlines, other situations. Her case had become a symbol of something bigger. But unlike most viral moments that fade away, she was positioned to create lasting change. Her office printer hummed as she prepared copies of her proposal. Each page was carefully crafted to appeal to both the airline's business sense and their public image concerns. She knew from her corporate law experience that real change happens when it makes both ethical and financial sense. The airline's PR team tried calling again. "We can offer you first-class upgrades for life," they suggested. She politely declined. "I'm more interested in making sure everyone is treated with first-class respect, regardless of where they're sitting," she responded. Support kept flowing in from unexpected places. Other airlines started reaching out quietly, asking about her training proposals. Corporate diversity officers from major companies sent messages of encouragement. Even airline industry publications were requesting interviews. As she prepared for the upcoming meeting with the airline's board, she reviewed her presentation one final time. The incident that was meant to humiliate her had instead given her a platform to create real change. Her proposal went far beyond sensitivity training. It was a complete overhaul of how airlines handle customer service and staff education. Looking out her office window at the Chicago skyline, she thought about all the people who had supported her on that flight. The grandmother's kind words, the judge's guidance, the flight attendant's courage in speaking up. All of it had led to this moment. Tomorrow, she would walk into that boardroom not as a victim seeking compensation, but as a professional offering solutions. Sometimes the best response to discrimination isn't anger or lawsuits. It's showing people a better way forward. The airline's corporate headquarters stretched high into the Chicago sky, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun. The lawyer walked through the revolving doors, her presentation tucked safely in her briefcase. Security had been expecting her. News of her arrival had spread through the building like wildfire. Inside the boardroom, 12 executives sat around a massive table, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. The CEO, a man who rarely attended these types of meetings, sat at the head of the table. The viral video playing silently on the screen behind him had forced his attendance. "We want to start by offering our deepest apologies," the CEO began, but the lawyer politely raised her hand to pause him. "Before we discuss apologies," she said, pulling out her laptop, "I'd like to show you something more important." The room fell silent as she connected her computer to the display screen. Her presentation wasn't what they expected. Instead of demands or complaints, she showed them data, statistics about customer satisfaction, employee retention rates, and the financial benefits of comprehensive diversity training. The executives began taking notes, their defensive postures gradually relaxing. "What happened on that flight wasn't just about me," she explained, clicking through slides that showed similar incidents across various airlines. "It's about a systemic issue that's costing you money and damaging your reputation. But more importantly, it's about doing better for everyone, your passengers and your employees." The chief of operations leaned forward. "You've clearly done your homework," he admitted. "But implementing new training programs across our entire workforce would be expensive." She was ready for this objection, pulling up cost-benefit analyses and potential revenue improvements. "Actually," she countered, "what's expensive is losing customers due to discriminatory incidents. What's expensive is the high turnover rate among staff who feel unsupported. What's expensive is damaging your brand in an age where every interaction can go viral." The room grew quiet as she shared testimonials from their own employees. Flight attendants who wanted better training, ground crew who felt unprepared for difficult situations, supervisors who lacked proper guidance for handling sensitive issues. Then came her proposal. A comprehensive training program developed with input from diversity experts, customer service specialists, and experienced airline staff. It wasn't just about avoiding discrimination. It was about creating a better experience for everyone. The flight attendant who had caused the original incident was brought into the discussion. Instead of firing her, the lawyer suggested making her part of the solution. "Sometimes our strongest advocates for change are people who've learned from their mistakes," she explained. Hours passed as they discussed implementation details. The CEO's initial skepticism had transformed into genuine interest. Other executives were already making calls to their teams, exploring ways to integrate the new proposals into their existing systems. "This isn't just about avoiding bad publicity," the lawyer emphasized. "It's about setting a new standard for the entire industry." She showed them projections of how being an industry leader in this area could actually boost their bottom line. The meeting ran well over its scheduled time. As the sun began to set outside the towering windows, the CEO stood up. "We're not just going to implement your program," he announced. "We want you to help us develop it. Will you consider taking a consulting role?" It wasn't the outcome anyone had expected when she walked in that morning. What could have been a confrontational meeting had transformed into a collaborative planning session for real change. As she packed up her materials, one of the board members approached her. "You know," he said quietly, "we were prepared for a lawsuit. Instead, you've given us an opportunity to become better. That's real leadership." Walking out of the building that evening, she couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best way to fight discrimination isn't through conflict, but through education and understanding. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time, it felt like genuine change was possible. 6 months had passed since that pivotal boardroom meeting. The lawyer stood in front of a packed training room at the airline's main hub, watching as flight attendants, pilots, and ground crew members engaged in an interactive workshop she'd helped design. The change was already visible in the faces around her. "Let's talk about real situations you faced," she said to the group. A young flight attendant raised her hand, sharing a challenging scenario from last week. Instead of feeling helpless, the staff now had proper tools and support to handle difficult situations. The transformation was happening, one training session at a time. The flight attendant from the original incident sat in the front row. After completing the new training program herself, she'd become one of its strongest advocates. "I never realized how my actions affected others," she admitted during a break. "This program opened my eyes to things I didn't even know I needed to learn." Down in the terminal, new signs highlighted the airline's commitment to inclusive service. Customer satisfaction scores were climbing, and employee morale had improved significantly. Other airlines had started reaching out, asking about implementing similar programs. The retired judge who'd witnessed the original incident called to share some news. "Your story made it into a law school textbook," he said proudly. "They're using it as a case study in how to create positive change without litigation." She smiled, remembering how different things could have been if she'd chosen a more confrontational path. The social media influencer who'd recorded the original video was now working with the airline's marketing team, creating content about their improved training programs. Her latest video, showing behind-the-scenes footage of the new workshops, had gone viral for all the right reasons. During lunch, she sat with a group of veteran flight attendants. "The best part," one of them shared, "is that we finally feel equipped to handle any situation. No more uncertainty, no more fear of saying or doing the wrong thing." Others nodded in agreement, sharing stories of how the training had helped them in real situations. The airline's CEO stopped by during the afternoon session. "Our customer complaints are down 40%, he reported, beaming. "And it's not just about avoiding problems. Our customer satisfaction ratings have never been higher." What had started as crisis management had evolved into a complete cultural transformation. Later that day, she received an email from the grandmother who'd offered her seat during the incident. "I flew with your airline last week," she wrote. "The difference in how the staff handled everything was like night and day. You've created real change, dear. Be proud." The training program had expanded beyond just handling discrimination. It now included modules on cultural awareness, conflict resolution, and creating a welcoming environment for all passengers. Staff members were learning not just what to avoid, but how to actively make things better. Most importantly, the airline had created a clear system for reporting and addressing concerns. No more swept under the rug incidents, no more ignored complaints. Every issue was treated as an opportunity to learn and improve. As she wrapped up the day's session, a flight attendant trainee approached her. "I chose this airline specifically because of your program," she said shyly. "I wanted to be part of something that's making a real difference." These were the moments that made all the hard work worthwhile. Walking through the terminal later, she passed the gate where it all began 6 months ago. A flight was boarding, and she paused to watch. The scene was different now. Staff members confidently handling their duties with new awareness and skill. Passengers being treated with consistent respect regardless of their seat assignment. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, she thought. What could have been just another viral video had instead become a catalyst for real transformation. The airline industry was finally learning that treating people with dignity wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good business too. 1 year after the incident, the lawyer stood on stage at the airline industry's annual leadership conference. The spotlight felt warm as she looked out at the packed auditorium. Representatives from airlines worldwide had gathered to hear about the program that had transformed one company's culture and was now spreading throughout the industry. Change doesn't always come from big moments, she began, her voice clear and confident. Sometimes it comes from a middle seat in the last row of an airplane. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Many had seen the viral video that started it all. In the front row sat familiar faces: the retired judge who'd offered his support, the grandmother who'd shown kindness, and even the flight attendant whose actions had sparked everything. They'd all become part of a bigger story, one about how a negative experience could lead to positive change. Today, I'm proud to announce that our training program has been adopted by 5 major airlines, she continued. The screen behind her showed statistics. Customer satisfaction up by 60%, discrimination complaints down by 75%, employee retention improved by 45%. Numbers that proved doing the right thing was also good business. During the break, airline executives crowded around her, sharing their own company's experiences with the program. A CEO from a European airline described how they'd adapted it for their cultural context. An Australian carrier reported similar success with their implementation. The most touching moment came when a young flight attendant trainee approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your story inspired me to join the industry," she said. "I wanted to be part of this change." These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Back in Chicago, her law firm had created a new division focused on corporate culture transformation. What started as one incident had grown into a movement, helping companies across different industries improve their practices and policies. The original viral video had found new life as a training tool, now viewed in a completely different context. "Here's where everything changed," training facilitators would say, using it to show how far the industry had come. Her phone buzzed with a message from the social media influencer who'd recorded the initial incident. "Just hit 10 million views on the follow-up story about the training program's success," it read. People love seeing positive change in action. Walking through airports had become a different experience. Staff members who recognized her would share stories about how the new training had helped them handle difficult situations better. Passengers would stop her to say they'd noticed the improvement in service. The grandmother who'd offered her seat that day had become a regular speaker at training sessions, sharing her perspective on how small acts of kindness could make a big difference. Her presence reminded everyone that change happens through individual actions as much as through corporate policies. Near the end of her keynote speech, the lawyer shared something personal. "Last week, I flew first class again," she said. "But what made me proudest wasn't my seat assignment. It was watching how every single passenger was treated with equal respect and dignity." The applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who'd helped turn a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. The flight attendant who'd caused the original incident stood and applauded too, tears in her eyes, having become one of the program's strongest advocates. As she left the stage, a reporter asked her what was next. She smiled, thinking about all the companies that had reached out for help with their own transformation programs. "This was never just about airlines," she replied. "It's about showing how we can all do better, one step at a time." The conference center emptied slowly, but conversations about change continued in the hallways, at dinner tables, and on flights home. Sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments, and in this case, a simple airline seat assignment had sparked a revolution in corporate culture that would continue to grow for years to come.